There is a bizarre complication involving how Israel might strike back against Iran, involving Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. And of course, it is about oil. So let's try to untangle this complicated web. The jumping off point is Iran's attack using about 180 ballistic missiles on Israel, and how Israel might go about responding to it. Most of the speculation focuses on two types of targets. One is conventional weapons. This could be Iran's ballistic missile systems, which would reduce Iran's ability to replicate that attack later. Alternatively, Israel could target Iran's defensive weapons, such as S-300 surface-to-air missile systems. It is a former Soviet design, as you can see from this 2018 parade in Moscow. Regardless, hitting defensive countermeasures would facilitate further operations should Iran continue down this escalation spiral. Both of these sub-options fall into the category of counterforce targeting, meaning that the damage does not directly hurt anything valuable, but rather stymies Iran's ability to fight and win a war. The other main target of discussion is Iran's nuclear program, which would be part counterforce, but also part countervalue. The counterforce part is that Western intelligence believes that Iran's various nuclear projects are cover for a weapons program. Now, though Iran does not currently have nuclear weapons, an attack on those facilities would forestall a future shift in the balance of power once Iran gives the nuclear green light. So, think of it as future counterforce, rather than the present counterforce factor that attacking missile systems would represent. The countervalue part of it is that regardless of Iran's weapons intent, most of what could be targeted doubles as something with legitimate civilian applications. For example, if you spin these centrifuges for a while, you turn naturally occurring uranium into the fuel to run a nuclear power plant. Keep those things spinning for a while longer, though, about as much time as the first process, just doing it for a second round, and you get something that can produce a substantially larger boom. There are clear problems with both of these strategies, however. After Iran's first missile attack back in April, Israel went with the counterforce path. Actually, the targets were the S-300s from earlier. Nevertheless, as we now know, that did not stop Iran from conducting the second attack. So, if Israel wants to deliver some direct punishment this time, Option 1 will not cut it. Option 2's problem is sheer difficulty. Some of Iran's nuclear facilities are underneath mountains. That would mean lugging heavy bunker-busting bombs over there, and even then it remains unclear whether they could penetrate that much earth. Yes, you could blast the entrances more easily, but that is only a half measure. Perhaps as a result, discussion has turned to a third option, Iran's energy production. Now, this got started in large part because Biden mentioned it off the cuff, saying that, we're discussing that, I think that would be a little, anyway, and then did not finish the thought. But it was enough for Brent crude oil to jump 5% immediately thereafter. So let's talk about that more. For one thing, the geography here is more favorable. By its nature, the infrastructure is above ground and available for all to see via satellite. It is also closer to Israel. By geographic coincidence, most of Iran's oil fields run along the Persian Gulf. And if you give me some lines, this fact is easy to remember once you learn that Saddam Hussein thought he could just stroll across the border and capture them. That did not work so well. Back in the present, 90% of Iran's crude oil goes through Karg Island, which makes it an obvious target for any Israeli attack on this front. And indeed, tankers have been evacuating the premises. As the adage goes, don't listen to what countries say. Rather, you should watch what they do. Pulling tankers away will cost a lot of revenue, so it is not something you would order if you did not think that Israel was at least considering this option. That said, refineries are better targets all else equal. They are higher up on the supply chain. So anything destroyed there also effectively wastes all of the expenses that Iran invested into the process beforehand. Afterward, it also potentially leaves oil fields with nowhere to send their supplies. If that sounds familiar, It is because Ukraine has been doing this to Russia since January, and it is creating serious budget issues in Moscow. But the payoff to Israel goes a couple of steps further than that. Looking at the big picture, about 80% of Iran's total exports come from the energy sector, and about half of the Iranian government's revenues trace back to it. Indeed, that second point is not abnormal for autocratic regimes. If you are an American, say what you will about the IRS, but most people are okay paying their taxes because they actually like the US system of government. Well, to be clear, they might not like those in charge of the government, but Americans love their freedom, and certainly prefer this to the alternative. In contrast, autocratic governments face greater compliance problems, which in turn forces them to earn revenues from what they can control, like energy exports. Meanwhile, the first point speaks to how Iran has something known as a Dutch disease vulnerability. That is when growth in a natural resource industry cannibalizes other export industries, leaving only the service sector behind to provide for those in the resource sector. But the problem here is that if you eliminate the resource sector, the service sector falls apart as well, and the other export industries do not have the infrastructure to pick up the slack. Political upheaval can arise as a result. If that sounds familiar, it is because we have talked before about how Russia is working through that exact problem right now. For Israel, though, it means that just targeting one sector can blow up Iran's entire economy. Moreover, the second point means that Israel can eliminate the Iranian government's financial ability to continue a war. In other words, counter-value targeting indirectly gets back to counter-force targeting. It is a classic 2-for-1. So, with all of those upshots for targeting Iran's energy exports, why hasn't Israel gone ahead and done it already? Well, you can look no further than the United States, as well as Israel's international partners more generally. Yes, the vast majority of Iran's exports head east toward Asia, and China especially does not mind skirting Western sanctions. However, oil and gas have globalized commodity markets. Consequently, if you take Iran's oil off of that market, China will start seeking it elsewhere, and so prices will go up everywhere. Hence the concern among oil importers. Now, Iran only produces about 3% of the world's supply, but oil prices are highly inelastic, meaning that small changes to supply result in disproportionately large price shocks. Even a country like the United States, a recent entrant into the net exporter club, does not like the idea, given how much it will affect consumers. Oh, and looking at the calendar, I guess there is an election coming up? Weird, I haven't seen a political ad in months. Anyway, the last thing that the Biden administration wants is a spike in oil prices, if there is to be continuity in the Democrats' control of the White House. But to be clear, this is not just about a November election. It has been a long-running policy precisely because American consumers are sensitive to price shocks. You can see this by looking at the other war going on. Indeed, it is the same reason that the United States is against Ukraine striking Russia's oil infrastructure. Speaking of which, and taking a deep breath here because the complicated web is just getting worse, Russia's invasion is another reason why the United States hesitates to support strikes on oil facilities in Iran. You see, Russia might emerge as the biggest winner there when oil prices inevitably spike. Right as things are seemingly falling apart in Moscow, it would get a huge boost to its economy. Moreover, counter-force targeting would harm Iran's long-term ability to arm Russia, meaning that hitting the oil infrastructure would doubly hurt Washington's strategic goals. Now, over the last year, Israel has shown plenty of agency in taking actions that the White House is against. Still, Israel does not want to venture too far from Washington's preferred policies, lest it see its military aid dry up. Thus, if you really wanted to get everyone on board, you need to find someone to pick up the slack. And that is where Saudi Arabia finally comes into the picture, both because Riyadh is the only one who can suddenly produce that much more oil, and luckily because the incentive is there to do so. At present, Saudi Arabia is holding back its oil production as a part of OPEC's cartel pricing strategy. The short-term sacrifice allows Riyadh to benefit from how collusion allows for higher long-run prices. Thus, Saudi Arabia needs some sort of countervailing incentive to break that. Well, Saudi Arabia's main regional rival is Iran. So, greasing the wheels to get the United States on board to give Israel the thumbs up to attack Iran is not the worst idea. Never mind that Iran's lost capacity would give Saudi Arabia a money-making opportunity regardless. As a result, the real potential consequences for Riyadh would come in whether Iran would strike back. Now, even within an ever-growing death spiral, that would represent a significant escalation. Remember, Saudi Arabia is just increasing oil production here. Iran would be the one turning it into a kinetic conflict. But it would not be the first time that Iran has struck Saudi oil infrastructure, at least depending upon whom you ask. In 2019, a swarm of drones attacked 2 refineries in Saudi Arabia. Officially, the Houthis took the action in retaliation for Saudi Arabia's participation in the Yemen civil war. However, Saudi Arabia and the United States believe that Iran was responsible. In any case, Iran would have to worry about how Saudi Arabia might strike back, forcing Iran to fight 2 of its 3 biggest foes at once, while the United States also watches with deep interest. It would be the ultimate irony from the last year. Hamas committed the October 7th attack in part to keep Israel and Saudi Arabia from normalizing relations. It has actually been a topic of discussion that we have had since day one, with Israel recently having normalized relations with many others in the region. Yet it could be the fallout from that decision that ultimately brings the pair together. Of course, that might deter Iran from taking such a military response. Ignoring how weird it would be for Iran to attack Saudi Arabia just because Saudi Arabia is pumping more oil, it might not be the best idea to militarily engage the country that ranks 5th in arms expenditures. Then again, Israel would likely use Saudi airspace to conduct the attack, with a wink and a nod toward Riyadh that the Saudis had no idea that this was happening. Honestly, Scout's honor. So you can see why Iran might feel justified on account of that. That said, you still have Russia that benefits from higher oil prices, and would encourage Iran to take the action, whereas China is the one that benefits from lower oil prices and wants to try to be the voice of reason and keep Iran away from Saudi Arabia. But good luck with that. Like I said from the start, the whole thing is a mess. If you want to know more about the broader war in the Middle East, check out this playlist on that topic. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Take care. Wait, I talk about Dutch disease in this high-quality book, so you should check that one out as well. Bye now.